Star Wars only, I don't know what the fuck your problem is.
The president of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, talked to Rolling Stone recently about George Lucas and his dissatisfaction with The Force Awakens, and also his potential future involvement in the Star Wars saga. They asked her, "Thanks to Bob Iger's new book, we now know in some detail about George Lucas's dissatisfaction with The Force Awakens. What are your feelings about that?" And Kathleen Kennedy says, "Personally, I've had a relationship with George going back to all of us meeting before making Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this is a long 35 plus years that I've known George, and I continue to be very, very good friends with George. And I think there's plenty of examples where people create something that is fundamental to who they are, where it's difficult letting go and watching that become something different. So I think initially that was difficult for George. I don't think he anticipated how hard that would be, and JJ came into it with such enthusiasm and frankly, reverence for Star Wars and for George, and had to find out what was personal for him. He had to make it his own. Every director who comes into a movie has to make something their own. They have to find themselves in the storytelling, and then that's going to become a different point of view, and I think that's all George was reacting to. He may not agree with every choice JJ made, he may not agree with every choice Ryan made, but he appreciates the filmmaking, that I know. And he appreciates, for instance, what ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, has done in the work of these movies. I mean, that's a company he created, and he continually tells me how astounded he is by how far things have come, and how now, whatever comes into your mind can be achieved. And he came down, for instance, on The Mandalorian to see what we were doing. He worked a long time with director Dave Filoni, and he's known series creator Jon Favreau, and he was just like a little kid on the set when he was watching what they were doing. So I see him get caught up in this again, and I think there's a little bit of regret that he's not on the stage and directing movies and in it still. And that may filter into it as well. I can't really speak on behalf of what George is feeling all the time, but I know that he's very, very proud of what he's created. And to see people go on and enjoy this now until almost 2020 is pretty remarkable. So we know George Lucas wasn't happy with the direction they chose for the sequel trilogy. What happened was he sold the story treatments that he had for the sequel trilogy to Disney, and after they bought that from him, they bought the rights to Star Wars. And there must have been something lost in translation there, where George thought since they bought the story treatments to his sequel trilogy and then bought Star Wars after that, they were actually going to use his story treatments. And so when he attended a meeting with Michael Arndt, J.J. Abrams, Kathleen Kennedy, and realized that they weren't using his story outlines for the sequel trilogy, he got extremely upset. Probably not at Kathleen Kennedy or J.J. Abrams, but mainly at someone like Bob Iger, and just the process of everything of, what the hell, guys, you're not using the stuff I made, this is my franchise. I understand why he would be mad. I also understand why they probably wouldn't use his story outlines if they wanted to go in a different direction, but still bringing him in to consult makes sense. But it's understandable why Lucas was frustrated with everything. He's an innovator when it comes to technology in the film industry. When it came to the original trilogy, he had people who innovated the camera technology and the special effects. Then you came to the prequel trilogy, and he innovated it with the digital technology, using digital cameras to film the movies, mainly episodes 2 and 3, instead of using normal film stock. So when it came to The Force Awakens and he saw that at a private screening at Lucasfilm and realized there's nothing new, there's nothing innovative, it's the same story that he's already done, he's not entirely happy with that, and he thinks likely he probably could have done it different and better himself. And so I understand that, and I agree with Kathleen Kennedy when she says that there's a part of him that's probably missing being so involved in this and wanting to be a part of it. And this is his legacy, so there's an understanding on why he's so attached to it. But I do find it funny how, since the book for Bob Iger came out and it had that little betrayed part in it, everyone uses that as like a catch line to act like Kathleen Kennedy betrayed Lucas and they're not friends anymore. Kathleen Kennedy and George Lucas have been friends longer than I've been alive, and they trust each other. They're, often talking, I assume, not every day, of course, but I know they talk, for sure. And it's not surprising that Lucas felt a little betrayed by the lack of using his story treatments for the sequel trilogy, but I highly doubt he's blaming that entirely on Kathleen Kennedy. That likely rests on the shoulders of Bob Iger and people like Alan Horn and Alan Beverman, but that's besides the point. They do ask Kathleen if George could possibly come back and work on Star Wars again. They say, is there any universe in which George can be lured back for some kind of one-off or just to do anything? And Kathleen says, I doubt it, but listen, I think that would be fantastic if he would be interested in doing that again. But I doubt it. He's loving doing his museum, the Los Angeles Lucas Museum of Narrative Art right now. That's a huge project which is going to be absolute fantastic. It's a narrative museum, so it really keeps him engaged in storytelling. I think he's loving that, and he's loving his little girl, his 6-year-old daughter Everest, so he's pretty fulfilled. And I do agree with her on him not coming back, because he sold it, not on a whim, but he kind of sold it for some financial incentive because of the tax laws in 2012. But there's also the idea that he was old. I mean, he is older now too. He's not really there anymore in terms of filmmaking to do an entire trilogy. If it's a one film thing, I'm all for it. But Lucas hates studios. That's the whole reason he made American Zoetrope with Francis Ford Coppola back in the 60s and 70s, is to be different from the normal movie studio idea. He hates having someone telling him what to do. It was very interesting to me that he actually wanted to sell Star Wars to Disney, but yet retain creative control over everything and just kind of do whatever he wants. I mean, I would rather that happen, honestly, than what we've had so far, but I also understand as a business, as Disney, you can't buy something for $4 billion and let the man do whatever the hell he wants with that company. Still, I think that Lucas coming back would be ideal for Star Wars fans, but not ideal for Lucas. Reason being is he would have someone to report to. He would have to talk to Alan Horn and Bob Iger about the plannings for his trilogy or the movie he would be working on, whatever it would be. And Lucas doesn't like that. He doesn't like having to go to somebody and ask for permission to do something on his movie simply because they're putting up the money. It's his creative mind, his creative story that he wants to tell. And as a businessman, because he is a decent businessman, he knows how the industry works and he knows how the business works. And it's entirely ironic in my eyes that Star Wars came from someone like George Lucas, who hates the studio, who hates the Hollywood system, has spent his entire career trying to be different and get away from that, yet he sold it to the biggest studio out there today, and they're the ones who run Star Wars now. I just think that's a touch of not really funny irony, but still. But I think Kathleen makes some good points that he, of course, is going to disagree with Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams on their decisions in the Skywalker saga, because that's kind of how the story works in a way. I mean, he didn't agree with everything that Irvin Kershner and Richard Marquand did when they were making their Star Wars films in the 80s. It just kind of comes with the territory. But I do think it's nice to hear that she's open to him coming back. I mean, why wouldn't she be? It'd be kind of disrespectful for her to say, no, I don't want George to come back. If he came up to her and said, hey, I'd like to direct a film and write one, and if she said no, it's kind of like, hey, he's the entire reason you have that job. In a way, she does owe him something, and she does feel a sense of responsibility to George Lucas, which is entirely understandable. I mean, he is the entire reason that she is there in the president of Lucasfilm role. I'm interested to see what the future of Star Wars holds. I hope Lucas is a little enticed to come back. As a Star Wars fan, I think it's something we need just to see what he can do one last time before he sadly becomes a Force Ghost. But to be fair, like I said, he might not be a big fan on coming back and dealing with the Hollywood studio system that he likely would have to deal with. But since it is George Lucas, I could see him having a lot of leeway in that discussion and in that creative role. So tell me your thoughts below. What do you guys think about this interview of Kathleen Kennedy talking about George Lucas being dissatisfied with The Force Awakens and his possibility of coming back into the Star Wars universe? Hope you guys enjoyed this talk. I'll see you guys next time, and may the Force be with you always.